Standing before Cheryl, I calmly announced my decision. I'm moving back in with my parents. If this doesn't sit well with you, then perhaps we should consider divorce, I said, my voice stripped of emotion. Cheryl stared back at me, shock and confusion playing across her face as she struggled to grasp the boldness of my statement. It felt like a harsh blow to her. What are you talking about, Raymond? She faltered, her voice a blend of disbelief and dismay. It's quite straightforward, I continued, my gaze icy and detached. We could use your $7 million inheritance to build our new home there. That's what I'm proposing. A knot of tension formed in Cheryl's stomach. The inheritance, her mother's final gift, had suddenly become a pawn in my plan. You can't be serious, she whispered, barely audible. But I am completely serious, Cheryl. It's time for some changes, I asserted sharply, cutting through the air. Visions of our shared life, filled with laughter, love, and the milestones of our children flashed through her mind. How had our paths veered so off course? At 35, a mother of two, Cheryl thought she had been living an ordinary life with a man she once loved deeply. Now, I stood before her transformed, unrecognizable. You have no right to dictate how my inheritance is used, she protested, her voice quivering with a mix of anger and disbelief. As your husband, I believe I do have a say. It's either my way or the highway. Make your decision, Cheryl, I declared, my tone brooking no argument. She searched my face for a glimpse of the man she once knew but found only a stranger with greedy eyes fixed on her inheritance. Realizing the depth of the deception, she found herself overshadowed by the man she no longer recognized, her marriage revealed as a sham. Fine, she said, her voice remarkably steady amid the emotional turmoil. If that's what you want, then we're done. But I warned him, don't expect to touch a single cent of my money. My smirk disappeared, replaced by a look of utter shock. I hadn't seen this coming. Spinning on my heel, I stormed out and slammed the door behind me. Cheryl stood alone, her heart racing. The lines were now clearly drawn. This was no longer merely about money, but her dignity, her freedom. The next morning, the house was unnervingly quiet. As Cheryl prepared breakfast, scenes from last night's confrontation replayed in her mind, fueling a growing anger. How could I be so insensitive? The money wasn't just some jackpot, it was part of her mother's legacy, not a fund for me to recklessly spend. Our children, Lisa and Mark, picked up in the tense atmosphere but stayed silent. They were too young to grasp the complexities of adult problems, yet they could tell something was off. Cheryl managed to smile for their sake. After dropping them off at school, she drove to her late mother's house, now empty but filled with echoes of the past. Sitting in the living room, she remembered how my parents often made snide comments about their lifestyle, choices, and even their kids. They had always clung to traditional gender roles, and it seemed I had absorbed these archaic views. I can't understand why you're still working, my mother had once sneered, her disdain clear. A woman's place is at home with the children? I, Raymond, never defended her. I always dismissed my parents' offensive remarks, telling her to just ignore them. But those words were like needles, constantly pricking at Cheryl's self-esteem. Now, with her mother gone and our marriage unraveling, she felt a surge of resentment towards me. I had never truly been a partner to her, leaving her to fend for herself against my parents' criticisms without ever taking her side. She vividly recalled being pregnant with Lisa and how my parents had openly hoped for a grandson. When Lisa was born, their disappointment was unmistakable. Next time, make sure it's a boy, they had said. Alone in the quiet of the house, Cheryl's resolve hardened. She knew what she had to do. Barely concealing their displeasure, they expressed their dissatisfaction openly. The pain of watching my daughter endure such blatant favoritism was unbearable. Now Raymond wanted us to use my inheritance to move closer to his parents, plunging us deeper into their toxic environment. The very thought made my blood boil. I was determined not to let that happen. As I sat amidst the remnants of my mother's life, I felt a resolve building within me. I refused to be pushed around. I decided to stand up, not only for myself, but also for my children.
Raymond had shown his true colors, and it was time he faced the consequences. The battle lines were drawn, and I was prepared for the struggle ahead. Over the next few days, I gathered important documents and braced for the legal fight that loomed. My lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Gloria, was reassuring. "Don't worry, Cheryl. We'll make sure that inheritance stays right where it belongs," she said with a confident smile. One evening, as I sorted through my mother's belongings, I discovered an old, dusty envelope hidden in a drawer. Inside, I found a collection of documents, stock certificates, and property deeds. My hands trembled as I grasped the full extent of my mother's hidden wealth, which, including the current value of the stocks and properties, amounted to a staggering $7 million. I was in awe. My mother, who had always lived modestly, had accumulated a small fortune. She had been incredibly prudent with her money, a fact that now offered a new ray of hope and strength. I never imagined that my mother had saved so much. An accompanying note penned in her neat handwriting read, "Cheryl, I saved this for a rainy day. I hope it gives you and the kids a better life. Use it wisely." As I read her words, tears filled my eyes. Her foresight and love enveloped me like a warm embrace, transcending even from beyond the grave. The next day, I resolved to confront Raymond about his ill-conceived plan to misuse my inheritance. I found him in the living room, casually browsing through a magazine. "Raymond, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm and composed. He looked up, irritation flickering in his eyes. "What is it now, Cheryl?" "I found something from my mother," I started, waving the envelope. "It turns out she left me stocks and properties worth $7 million. Raymond's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and greed quickly passing over his face. $7 million? That's great news, he exclaimed, but his enthusiasm repulsed me. "Don't get any ideas, Raymond. This money is for me and the kids. You won't see a cent of it." His face darkened. "You can't keep it all to yourself, Cheryl. We're married. What's yours is mine," he snapped back. Anger surged within me. "You've shown your true colors, Raymond. You don't care about me or the kids. All you see are dollar signs." Raymond stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "You're being selfish, Cheryl. I'm thinking about our future, about our family." "What family, Raymond? The one you're ready to sacrifice for your selfish desires?" I retorted. He stepped closer, fists clenched. "You'll regret this, Cheryl. I'll make sure of it." I stood my ground, unflinching. "Bring it on, Raymond. I'm not afraid of you anymore." He stormed out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew this was just the beginning of a long and bitter battle, but I was ready. For my children, for my mother's legacy, and myself. The following week was a whirlwind of legal consultations and tense silences at home. Raymond's demeanor had shifted from shock to cold, calculated aggression. He was like a caged animal, desperate and dangerous. One evening, while the kids slept, Raymond cornered me in the kitchen. His eyes wild, his stance threatening, he accused, "You think you're clever, Cheryl, hiding that money from me?" I leaned against the counter, my heart pounding, prepared for whatever would come next. But my voice remained steady. "It's not about being clever, Raymond. It's about doing what's right. That money is for me and the kids, not for your unrealistic dreams." He slammed his fist on the countertop, making me flinch. "I am your husband. I have rights to that money," he claimed, his words dripping with venom. "You're just a—" he started, but I interrupted him. "A what, Raymond? A woman who refuses to submit to your greed and bullying?" His face twisted in anger. "You'll regret this, Cheryl. I'll make sure you don't get a dime of that money." I could sense the danger in his words, but refused to show any fear. "Is that a threat, Raymond?" I asked. He leaned in, his breath foul. "It's a promise." I pushed past him, my body shaking with adrenaline. "We'll see about that. The court will decide." As I walked away, his voice filled with malice followed me. "You're going to be left with nothing, Cheryl. Nothing." The next day, I received a call from my lawyer.
Cheryl, Raymond has filed for divorce. He's claiming half of your inheritance. I took a deep breath, a mix of fear and determination stirring within me. Let him try. I'll fight him every step of the way. Gloria's voice was firm. We have a strong case, Cheryl. Don't worry. We'll make sure justice is served. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about my children sleeping peacefully in their rooms. I dedicated myself to this battle for them, for their future.
Raymond had become a stranger, a man driven by greed and malice, yet I was no longer the woman he thought he could control and intimidate. As I closed my eyes, I envisioned the courtroom, the judge, and the final verdict. I pictured myself standing tall, fighting vigorously, not just for the money, but for my dignity, my children's future, and the quiet strength my mother had always shown. This was my battle, and I was fully prepared for it. The ensuing legal battle was grueling. Raymond's strategy was transparent, to portray me as an uncooperative wife, hoarding the family's resources. But how could he understand? However, his arguments were weak, more a display of desperation than a solid legal foundation. One afternoon, we found ourselves in mediation, a last effort to resolve matters before the court hearing. Raymond sat across from me, his lawyer by his side, his gaze icy and demeanor self-assured. "Let's be reasonable, Cheryl," his lawyer started. "Raymond is entitled to a part of this inheritance. It's only fair." I looked over at Gloria, my determination unwavering. "Fair? Raymond has not contributed to this inheritance. It is solely from my late mother, intended for me and my children." Raymond leaned forward, his tone derisive. "Come on, Cheryl, you're just being spiteful. Don't you think the kids would want their father to have a share?" I felt a rush of anger. "This isn't about spite, Raymond. It's about justice. You've never genuinely considered what the kids want. This is about your greed." His lawyer started to interject, but Raymond signaled him to stop. "You think you can just take everything, don't you? Play the grieving daughter and the victimized wife," he sneered. I met his gaze squarely. "This isn't a game, Raymond. You're the one trying to take what isn't yours." The mediator, a stern-faced, middle-aged woman, interjected, "Let's try to remain civil. This is about finding a resolution." Raymond cut her off, his voice rising. "A resolution? She's the one being unreasonable." The tension in the room was palpable, thick, and suffocating. I responded calmly yet firmly. "I am being perfectly reasonable. I'm protecting what my mother left for her grandchildren. Raymond's claims are baseless." Sensing the futility of the discussion, the mediator called for a break. As we stood up, Raymond leaned in close, his breath hot on my ear. "You'll pay for this, Cheryl. I'll make sure of it." His words were a chilling promise, but I remained resolved to stand my ground for the legacy and the rights of my children. I exited the mediation room, my heart pounding yet my resolve firm. Raymond's threats rang hollow. His legal standing was weak. Confident that the law was on my side, I dedicated myself wholeheartedly to the battle ahead. In the weeks leading up to the court hearing, I buried myself in legal preparations with Gloria. The kids stayed with my sister, spared from the worst of the upheaval. I missed them deeply, but I understood that this struggle was not just for my benefit, but for their future as well. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. As I stood in the courtroom, I steeled myself to face Raymond and counter any misleading story he might present. This was the pivotal moment, and I was ready to fight with every fiber of my being. The courtroom transformed into a battleground where words served as weapons, and Raymond's lawyer spun a narrative of a husband wronged, deprived of his rightful share. Yet, under Gloria's adept questioning, his claims quickly fell apart, disintegrating like a house of cards. During a recess, Raymond confronted me in the hallway, his expression contorted with rage. "You're ruining everything, Cheryl. You think you're going to walk away with all that money?" he hissed. Despite the fear that nibbled at my resolve, I stood firm. "It's not your money, Raymond. It never was." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I'll drag this out as long as it takes.
I'll bleed you dry with legal fees." Meeting his intense gaze, I responded with unwavering firmness. "Do what you must, but I won't let you bully me into submission." As we re-entered the courtroom, a wave of empowerment surged through me. Raymond's threat seemed more hollow than ever. His bravado was merely a facade for his desperation. When the final verdict was delivered, it was a vindication of my rights. The judge declared the inheritance solely mine, acknowledging my legal and moral claim to it. Raymond's face, as the judgment was read, mirrored the defeat of his case, a reflection of a battle fought and lost on his part. However, the victory was bittersweet. I had won the legal battle, but at the cost of my marriage. The family dynamic I had cherished was now fractured. In the weeks that followed, Raymond's life began to unravel. His reputation, once built on a foundation of lies and intimidation, crumbled. The community started to see him for the greedy individual who had tried to exploit his wife's inheritance. Rumors reached me about his myriad struggles, losing his job, his friends, and his standing in the community. It was a dramatic fall from grace, and despite everything, I felt a sense of poetic justice. One evening, a mutual acquaintance called. "Cheryl, have you heard about Raymond?" they asked. I hesitated, then replied, "No, what about him?" "He's moving out of town, lost his job, his house. He's pretty much broke." A complex emotion welled up inside me, not quite satisfaction, but something akin to it. Raymond had reaped what he sowed. He had aimed to destroy me, but ended up destroying himself instead. After hanging up, I looked at a picture of my children on the mantel. This fight had been for them, for their future and security. That night, as I tucked them into bed, I felt a profound sense of peace. The battle was over, and we had emerged stronger. We were finally free from Raymond's shadow, ready to start a new chapter. Our lives would be different, but we would be okay. We were together, and that was what mattered most. In the months following the court ruling, life found a new rhythm. The court victory granted me a sense of closure and a fresh start. The victory in court wasn't just an end. It marked the beginning of a new journey, one of healing and rebuilding. I decided it was time to sell the house, the backdrop of so many bitter memories. Each item I packed symbolized a step away from my past with Raymond, a deliberate stride toward a better future for Lisa and Mark. One day, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon a photograph of Raymond and me in happier times. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to grieve for the life I thought we had, the love I believed was real. But as I stared at his smiling face in the photo, I realized that the man I had married no longer existed. He had revealed his true nature, and it was far from the image captured in that picture. With a sense of finality, I tossed the photo into the trash bin, a symbolic gesture of letting go. Moving to a new town offered us a fresh start. I found a cozy home in a friendly neighborhood, and the kids quickly settled into their new school, making friends easily. I turned more attention to my writing, finding solace and expression in the worlds I created with my words. One evening, as I was tucking Lisa into bed, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes and asked, "Mom, do you miss Dad?" Her question caught me off guard. "Sometimes I miss who I thought your dad was," I admitted. "But we're better off now. We're a strong team, just the three of us." She nodded, her eyes showing a depth beyond her years. "I like it here, Mom. I like our new home." Her words filled me with warmth. We had indeed come a long way. As I lay in bed that night, I reflected on Raymond's downfall. His greed and malice had backfired spectacularly, leaving him with nothing. Yet here we were, rebuilding and finding joy in our new life, stronger and more united than ever. While I felt no joy in Raymond's misfortunes, there was a palpable sense of justice in how everything had unfolded. The kids and I had a lengthy journey of healing ahead, but we were firmly on the path. The inheritance, now securely invested, would ensure their education, and our future needs were well taken care of. As I closed my eyes, thoughts of my mother came to me. Her strength and foresight had truly been our salvation. In her wisdom, she had equipped me with the means to protect myself and my children. Drifting off to sleep, I was enveloped by a profound sense of peace. The storm that had once threatened to consume us had passed, leaving behind clarity and hope. We had weathered the worst, and now, with a new day dawning, we were ready to embrace whatever lay ahead with renewed spirit and optimism.
Does your father even earn enough to support you? My future father-in-law sneered, his words dripping with contempt. Or does he expect you to latch onto my son for security? I sat there, stunned, a chill settling over the room. Excuse me? I managed to say, but Gerald's gaze remained unyielding, cold and calculating. He barely paused before concluding, "It's not uncommon for families like yours to see an opportunity and seize it." Sensing my discomfort, Kingston interjected, "That's enough, Dad. Caroline isn't here to be insulted." Gerald's sharp, dismissive shrug said everything his words didn't. But he didn't know yet that his assumptions about my family were about to be shattered. I am Caroline Adams, a 31-year-old in San Francisco, with my boyfriend, Kingston. We met in law school 5 years ago, fell in love instantly, and have been living together since graduation. I work as an attorney in a consulting company, while Kingston is employed at a bank. 8 months ago, Kingston proposed during a holiday, and we decided to inform our parents about our wedding plans. This weekend, we were set to meet my parents, followed by a meeting with Kingston's parents the next week. This would be the first time we introduced each other to our respective families. Excited about our plans, I called my mom to share the news. However, my joy was marred by the hurtful conversation with my father. I couldn't understand why he would make such baseless accusations, tarnishing what should have been a joyous occasion. We planned to visit my parents' home this Sunday. "Does that sound good?" I asked. "Yeah, sure, see you," my mother replied. The following week, Kingston and I made our way to my parents' residence in Portland, where I had spent my entire upbringing. My father, Bryson Owen, retired as a judge, and my mother devoted her time to being a homemaker. Kingston appeared somewhat anxious during the journey, but I attempted to reassure him. "Don't worry, my parents are laid back." "Oh yeah, I'll find out today," he muttered. Upon entering the house, my mom eagerly came forward to welcome us. Kingston greeted her with a nervous smile, and she ushered us into the living room, where Dad sat engrossed in his newspaper. Kingston approached him and extended a handshake. My dad promptly rose and reciprocated with a formal handshake, his courteous demeanor swiftly dispelling Kingston's nervousness. The day unfolded with discussions about work and life, accompanied by a delightful lunch prepared by my mom. Dad shared anecdotes from his time in the courtroom, and my parents appreciated Kingston's polite nature. Kingston also appeared to enjoy his time with my parents, and we departed with fond memories. Kingston seemed relieved and delighted with the experience, and I shared in his happiness. The subsequent week marked my turn to meet Kingston's parents. Throughout the week, Kingston carried a sense of tension stemming from our upcoming visit with his parents. When I inquired, he simply replied, "You know, I don't get along well with my father." "I know," I replied. "Don't worry, it's just a matter of a few hours. We'll meet them and return home." Kingston's father, Gerald Holder, pursued a business career and hoped for Kingston to join his real estate venture. However, Kingston harbored different aspirations, desiring to study law. This difference in career paths strained their relationship over time. En route to his parents' home, Kingston cautioned me, "Don't be upset if my father behaves arrogantly." "Why? What could be the reason?" I asked, concerned. "I'm not sure. Perhaps he's still upset with me," he responded. "That happened a while ago," I reasoned. "He must have forgiven you by now." "I hope so," Kingston said quietly. "But my father isn't quick to forgive." "Don't stress too much," I assured him. "You're just overthinking. Everything will be okay." Kingston's nervous energy rubbed off on me, causing my unease. His residence, located on the opposite side of the city, was a story bungalow surrounded by a spacious lawn. Upon entering, Kingston's mother, Kendra, greeted us warmly. "Hello, my dear," she said, embracing us. Kendra appeared kind and composed as she led us outside to the bungalow's lawn, where my fiancé's dad, whom I'll refer to as Gerald, awaited us. Kingston rarely spoke about his father, but the little I knew led me to envision an arrogant, wealthy man eager to flaunt his riches. To my dismay, Gerald lived up to this image, sitting with folded arms and a rigid posture that suggested lingering anger towards Kingston. As soon as I made eye contact with Gerald, I flashed a broad smile and nodded in greeting. "Good day to you, sir," I said warmly. He acknowledged with a nod, signaling me to take a seat across from him. As I settled in, Kendra tactfully broke the silence. "Caroline, you exude beauty and elegance," she remarked. "Your parents seem to have taken great care of you." "Thank you for your kind words. You're beautiful as well," I responded, aiming to maintain a positive atmosphere. "That's very sweet of you. Could you share more about yourself?" Kendra encouraged, offering some relief in the presence of Gerald, who sat with crossed legs, folded arms, and an inscrutable expression. With a smile I began, "I was born and raised in Portland and currently work as an attorney at a consulting firm." Gerald's demeanor shifted noticeably, and he interjected with a somewhat accusatory tone. "Hold on, you're an attorney? Why can't your father provide for you? Does he not earn well? What did your father do?" His unexpected reaction caught me off guard, and I responded in a perplexed tone. "My dad is retired." Before I could finish, he cut me off sharply, insinuating that my father might be expecting me to support him in his retirement. Without letting me complete my thought, he passed judgment, leaving me furious. When I sought clarification, he callously insinuated that it's common for impoverished families to manipulate their daughters into trapping wealthy men for inheritance. I was in shock. Did he mean to suggest that my family and I had trapped his son for our wealth? His nonchalant shrug and response were even more shocking. I couldn't fathom someone being so heartless. Gerald's disdain for my financial status made me feel inferior. The urge to leave overwhelmed me, but Kingston, holding my hand, urged me to stay a while longer. Facing Gerald, Kingston firmly stated, "We haven't come here to endure taunts. We're here to announce our marriage." When Gerald inquired about the financial aspects of the ceremony, Kingston firmly replied, "That's our business, not yours." Gerald persisted, asserting that the financial burden would inevitably fall on Kingston. An argument ensued, with Kingston losing his temper and defending his decision to pursue law rather than joining the family real estate business. He refuted the claim that I influenced his choices, emphasizing that he didn't even know me when he left home. Gerald's unreasonable accusations against me and my parents were met with Kingston's strong opposition. Finally, Kingston asserted that he had no further comments and censured Gerald for making life decisions centered around marrying a financially challenged girl. "She and her parents appear to have already cornered you," my future father-in-law concluded. "Stop," Kingston said, irritated. "I've met her parents. They are kind people and have no interest in your wealth." The conversation between them became intense. "You've consistently made poor choices in life. I had already given up on you when you chose to study that seemingly foolish law and work for a meager salary instead of joining my business," Gerald shot back angrily. "I strongly disapprove of your business due to its questionable moral standing," Kingston continued reproachfully. "Please, let's put an end to this argument," Kendra pleaded, intervening in the heated exchange. Kingston angrily rose from his seat and exited the lawn, with me following closely. Kendra hurried behind us, imploring us to stop. "Kingston, please, stop," she begged, but he ignored her and continued towards the bungalow exit. Glancing back, I witnessed Kendra tearfully running towards us. I halted, and she grasped my arms, saying, "Please ask him to stop." The last time he left like this, he didn't meet me for several years. I stood there, feeling a sense of sympathy and remorse for her predicament. She wasn't to blame. She suffered due to her husband's arrogance. "Caroline, please ask Kingston to calm down," Kendra implored. I struggled to find the right words, still upset with Gerald's remarks. Attempting to console her, I replied, "Kingston is upset right now. Once he's in a better mood, I'll ask him to call you." "Yes, please ask him to call me, please," she continued to beg me. "Sure, take care, okay?" I said as I exited the premises. Kendra continued sobbing as I left the bungalow to find Kingston waiting for me inside the car. We drove back in silence, both deeply affected by the events at his father's house. After dinner, Kingston expressed regret over his father's actions. "Sweetheart, I'm truly sorry for how my father treated you. I know his harsh words caused you pain." "Yeah, I understand it's not your fault, but I can't overlook the fact that he's incredibly arrogant," I replied, then added, "How can someone be so rude? I know he's your father and I shouldn't speak ill of him, but he was unkind to me." "He has always been a mean person. Unfortunately, my mom has to endure his arrogance," Kingston explained. "I wonder how she's put up with your father for all these years," I murmured, shaking my head. Kingston's mom has always been a gentle-hearted woman, and it seems that his dad is taking advantage of her forgiving and caring nature. "I empathize with your mother," I added. "I also cut off ties with her when I'm angry with Dad. However, she has consistently loved and supported me," Kingston remarked. "It is not fair to punish her for your father's mistakes. You should reach out to her now. She was genuinely upset when you left the house in anger," I concluded. "You're right. Let me call her. Thanks for supporting me," my fiancé said gratefully. After the call, Kingston had a conversation with his mom, pacifying her. Still in shock, I was concerned that Gerald might insult my parents at our wedding. When Kingston returned after talking to his mom, I shared these concerns with him. He assured me that he would figure something out. As we delved into wedding preparations, I expressed my desire to marry on my parents' wedding anniversary in the same church where they tied the knot. "Would you mind if we married on my parents' wedding anniversary?" I asked. Initially amused, Kingston later agreed, saying, "It's not a big deal." With the date 8 months away, we gradually made preparations, booking a resort in Portland for the wedding dinner. My parents suggested a pre-wedding dinner with Kingston's parents for the families to get to know each other. Both Kingston and I were hesitant, anticipating that Gerald might ruin the gathering. I informed my parents that Kingston's dad was often busy with business travel. Although my father sensed something was amiss with our reluctance for a family get-together, he did not press further. Kingston shared the wedding date and location with his mom, who expressed happiness and excitement. She called me multiple times, showing genuine interest in the wedding preparations. As the wedding date approached, my concern grew about facing Gerald on my big day. Many times I considered asking Kingston not to invite Gerald, but I feared my parents would become suspicious of his absence. Moreover, not inviting Gerald might prevent Kendra from attending, and I didn't want her to suffer because of him. I opened up to my fiancé about my anxiety, saying, "Kingston, I'm worried that your father might ruin our big day with his arrogance. What if he insults my family in front of the guests?" He smiled and responded, "If he does, I'm sure your father would handle him and teach him a lesson. After all, he is a judge and knows how to handle difficult people." When I suggested telling my parents about this, Kingston advised against it, fearing unnecessary stress. "Let it be. If anything happens, I'll ensure that my dad doesn't cross his line," he reassured me. Although still not fully convinced, I found assurance in Kingston's words as he looked at me and said, "Honey, no matter what happens, I'll always be on your side, so cheer up." His response eased my concerns. I knew my father could handle the situation, as Gerald's arrogant assumption that we were after Kingston's inheritance was untrue. The day before our wedding, we drove to Portland, having booked a hotel for friends and relatives. Kingston's mom informed me that they would come directly to the church for the main wedding. Nervous but excited, I walked down the aisle with my dad, experiencing the happiest moment of my life. During the vow exchange, I noticed Gerald and Kendra entering the church. My parents escorted them to the front row, where Kendra waved happily. Meanwhile, Gerald sat with a grim face. At that moment, I stopped caring about him. I was overjoyed to have my parents with me as I embarked on the journey of marrying Kingston. Everything went smoothly, and after the ceremony, we retired to the hotel for some rest before the wedding dinner. Curious about whether my parents had the opportunity to meet Kingston's parents, I inquired with my mom. She revealed that due to the late arrival of Kingston's parents and the bustling wedding preparations, they only exchanged formal greetings. Concerned, I nervously questioned whether Gerald, Kingston's father, had expressed any concerns. My mom reassured me that Gerald hadn't conveyed anything and seemed rather silent throughout. However, she noted that he appeared upset, which heightened my anxiety. As we gathered for the wedding dinner, I couldn't shake off my unease. When Kingston's parents unexpectedly showed up, Kendra, Kingston's mother, was cheerful and greeted everyone with a warm smile. In contrast, Gerald stood rigid with folded arms, showing no interest in offering congratulations. Instead, he confronted Kingston, expressing dissatisfaction with the decision to hold the wedding at our place rather than theirs. Kingston defended the choice, urging, "Dad, don't spoil the occasion." Gerald, however, accused, "Your family is ruining your life, Kingston, with this extravagant wedding dinner." Kendra intervened, attempting to defuse the tension. Still, Gerald remained adamant, unconcerned about the arriving guests. To salvage the situation, my parents approached Kingston's parents, extending warm greetings and apologizing for the lack of formal introduction at the church. Despite Gerald's apparent disapproval, they maintained a polite conversation. When Gerald finally introduced himself, he highlighted his success, saying, "I run a real estate business with an annual turnover of over $23 million. The strained atmosphere persisted. Gerald interrupted again, commenting on my father's retirement. "Yeah, I know. Caroline mentioned you're retired now. It must be difficult for you," he said, with a hint of condescension. My father, with a hint of humor, responded, "Difficult? Why would it be difficult? I receive a handsome pension from the government for my service. I'm a retired judge, not a retired janitor." Amused by my father's unexpected revelation, Gerald stammered, "What? Are you a retired judge?" "Why is that a surprise?" My father laughed. "Did you assume I was a janitor?" Caught off guard, Gerald turned pale and struggled to find words. No, I didn't assume anything like that. I just didn't know you were in government services." Satisfied with the revelation, my father asked, "Now that you know, do you have anything to say?" "No, I'm good, thanks," Gerald muttered awkwardly. Observing the situation, I noted that Kingston was right about my father's ability to handle Gerald. Gerald, who initially made me feel inferior by assuming my family's financial status, was now taken aback to discover my father's esteemed position as a retired judge at the Portland court. As my parents excused themselves to greet other guests, Gerald pulled Kingston aside, expressing his frustration. "Why didn't you tell me her dad is a retired judge?" he demanded. Before I could respond, Kingston interjected, "Excuse us, we want to enjoy our wedding dinner," redirecting the conversation. Gerald's face turned red with anger, realizing he had miscalculated the social dynamics. He had presumed he was the wealthiest at the party, only to find renowned government officials and bureaucrats mingling with my parents. Left with no one to vent his frustration to, he turned to Kendra. The rest of the evening, he feigned a smile during introductions to high-profile guests, but his frustration was evident. Eventually, he left the party early, dragging Kendra with him, leaving her torn between spending time with us and fulfilling Gerald's demands. I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. After a few months, I learned that Kendra had decided to divorce Gerald. Her motivation stemmed from an inability to tolerate his dominating nature. Kingston confided in me. My father didn't initiate the establishment of the business himself. It was inherited from his paternal grandfather, Kendra's father. My husband explained that as his mother was the only daughter, her father entrusted the business to Gerald before retiring to the countryside. Despite Gerald being the face of the business, the true owner was Kendra. Following their divorce, she reclaimed her father's ancestral business from my father-in-law and handed it over to her first cousin. The bungalow, where Kingston's parents resided, also belonged to Kendra's family. After the divorce, Gerald was ousted from this ancestral home and found himself with no place to live. My mother-in-law shared with me, my ex-husband's parents and siblings severed ties with him long ago due to his insulting behavior towards them in light of their financial struggles. And now Gerald, having burnt bridges with his family, is making a living through odd jobs. Despite his predicament, I find it hard to feel sympathy for him, given the damage he caused to his relationships due to his shallow and arrogant nature. It appears that he entered into marriage with Kendra solely for her wealth, and his subsequent behavior suggests a projection of his greed onto others. On a positive note, Kingston and I frequently visit Kendra at her bungalow, where she has embarked on organic farming in the backyard, cultivating fresh fruits and vegetables. She generously shares her harvest with us during our visits. Witnessing her independent and content life, unaffected by her former husband's cruelty, brings me joy. My husband and I too are enjoying a happy and prosperous life together,